All right, thank you, Ben. I'm just going to do a quick legal update. There were a few things that happened last week. When we last met, New Jersey and Philadelphia had done some additional restrictions, but last week, as most of you who are operating in Pennsylvania know, the Wolf administration dropped some new requirements and new restrictions here in Pennsylvania. So we did put an alert out on this, so if you're on our mailing list, you've seen this, but I just want to go over it because we're getting some questions about it. So sort of back to telework. This is not an essential business issue. This is unless it's impossible, the government wants you working from home. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, if you're retail, if you're a restaurant, if you're manufacturing, it's impossible for you to work from home, right? But the rest of us, most of us who are doing desk jobs, most of us should be able to work from home. Now, if you're a business where you need to go in and pick up checks, you need to pick up mail, you need to do certain things physically in person, yeah, go ahead and do that. I think that's still okay. But we want to revert a little bit more back to where we were last spring. You can start to bring your folks home if you can, okay? And if you do have, if telework's not possible, use CDC guidelines, use Department of Health guidelines to make sure that you're doing everything correctly. And then there's a bunch of new mitigation measures. I think a lot of MEA's members have been doing a lot of this already, but some of them were not requirements, okay? So we now have temperature screens for everyone. Before in Pennsylvania, it was just temperature screens if you had had a case. Now it's temperature screens for everyone. And people have been asking me, what's the best way to do this? So we did a lot of on this issue back in the spring. The Wolf administration did say in some FAQs last spring, summer, that it was okay to have employees screen at home and just provide the results. Think about how you're going to collect that information, because you want to have the information, you want to keep the information, you want to store the information should anyone ever question it. So is there an easy electronic way to store it? Can you develop an app, a very quick, easy app, or something online so that you're not collecting mounds and mounds of paper? So something to think about. You want to think about staggering your start and stop times if you can. You don't want 100 people walking in the door at 9 o'clock, right? So if you can stagger that a little bit, really helpful. And then with regard to breaks and meals, again, if you're in person, you're probably doing this already. Make sure you have enough space and you're staggering so that you can socially distance. And again, stagger those break times. Limit the number of people in your common areas. If you do have a lunchroom, you don't want people sitting directly across from each other, maybe 2 people next to each other, 6 feet apart, facing the same direction. If you have meetings, and you now have all the great tips on how to run them virtually, run them virtually. If you're going to have people in person, there needs to be socially distanced, there need to be wearing masks, and you need to limit the number of people because we have gathering restrictions now in Pennsylvania. So it's much easier to run all your meetings virtually. Of course, masks, right? Face coverings. You have to require them for your employees. And I've gotten a lot of questions over the last 6 to 9 months about safety, about face shields versus masks versus, safe environments. If I have a person running heavy machinery and they are wearing a face mask and they're also wearing safety glasses and the safety glasses fog up because of the mask. Look, you've got to come up with practical solutions, and MEA has a fabulous safety partner that we can put you in touch with, and they can give you some counseling on this. They know all the ins and outs of OSHA and the best way to handle all of this, but you got to think through some problem solving, right? Sometimes you're going to do maybe a face shield can work. Make sure you have as much social distancing as you can. There may be creative solutions to all this, but you really need to think them through. And obviously, you want to make sure that your folks have access to hand sanitizer. They're getting breaks to wash their hands. I know if any of you go to Wegmans, you'll hear every once in a while over the loudspeaker, they'll say, if you're not directly assisting a customer right now, stop what you're doing and go wash your hands. So regular breaks throughout the day. Obviously, you're restricting your non-essential visitors. I think most companies have been doing this all along. And of course, you want to make sure that you have enough people to police all this other stuff that's going on. So again, if you want more details on this, we do have an alert out on it, and that is on our website. What about when you have a case? I think a lot more businesses, I've talked to more and more folks over the last 2-3 months who have had a case. So there's a lot of things that you need to do, but one of them is contact tracing, okay? What is contact tracing? If you've had a positive case and they've been within 6 feet of someone else, masked or unmasked, for a period of 15 minutes or more, and that's a cumulative 15 minutes, that CDC guideline recently changed, you need to let those people who were in close contact know that they've been exposed. And you need to let them know without violating confidentiality. And most people think, or a lot of folks think, that that confidentiality requirement comes from HIPAA. Not true for most employers. It comes from the Americans with Disabilities Act. But in any event, you do need to protect confidentiality as best you can. You don't want to name the employee who had the positive case. As most of our members point out to me pretty quickly, though, you know, in small organizations, everyone knows anyway, but still maintain that confidentiality. And again, do your contact tracing, make sure then you follow CDC guidelines about what you do with those folks who potentially have been exposed. If an employee becomes sick during the workday, send them home. An employee who has symptoms of COVID before reporting to work should know, don't come to work, report to the employer and stay home. And an employee who's a close contact of a person who's been diagnosed with or test positive for COVID can't work in person, and they have to quarantine. If an employee is diagnosed with or test positive for COVID, the employee can no longer work in person, even if they're asymptomatic. And I think that's a really good point. And again, CDC guidelines are evolving a little bit on this stuff. There's been some discussion about maybe shortening the amount of time that someone needs to stay in quarantine or isolation. So you guys have heard me say this before. Every week, if you have 5 minutes, spend it on the CDC's website, 5 extra minutes. It'll go a long way. They have a lot of great stuff on there. Okay. So what about travel? Obviously, we just came out of what in most years is a huge travel weekend. We are coming up on what, again, in most years would be huge travel times over the holidays. Remember, we're talking about business travel, you as the employer remain responsible for providing a safe working environment. So you need to think about, where's your employee going? How are they getting there? What kind of safety regulations are in place at the site, the customer site, the client site that they're going to? A phone call is probably in order to talk that through before you send anyone anywhere. And think about whether business travel really makes sense. Pennsylvania is now in a place where anybody going anywhere and coming back to the state, unless you're doing regular commuting or you're going for medical care, you leave Pennsylvania and you come back, 14-day quarantine. Okay. So think about that. Think about that for your business travel. Is it really worth it? And then for personal travel, what are you going to do about your employees? Are you monitoring it? Are you asking employees about their personal travel? Are you having employees quarantine when they come back from certain areas? You have to pay employees while they're quarantining. All great questions. I would recommend that you do monitor your employee travel and that you have something in writing telling employees that you expect them to share their travel plans with you. And what is the discipline going to be if they lie? So an employee doesn't tell you that they're traveling, and then another employee sees on Facebook that they were in Florida over Christmas. What are you going to do? It should be real clear, and you should be prepared to take whatever disciplinary action that you put in place. Do you need to pay folks while they're quarantining? It certainly appears right now that what we have in place in Pennsylvania is a government order, which means that it would qualify for leave, which is partially paid under the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, FFCRA. Keep in mind that if a lot of folks have already burned through their FFCRA time, but that's a consideration. It is possible that you may have to pay employees while they're quarantining case-by-case basis. And this is the hold on message. So there's a light at the end of the tunnel. I think we've all seen over the last several weeks that there is some promising news on vaccines. It looks like folks in this country, vulnerable populations could probably be getting vaccines by the end of the year, and the rest of us hopefully by sometime next year. And then this is something to think about. This is just planning. What are you going to do about COVID vaccines? Are you going to require them? You can if you have a legitimate health and safety requirement, but think about carrot and stick, right? What are you really going to do? It's probably better to encourage folks, go through your education campaign, try to encourage it rather than talk about discipline if you're not going to do it. I imagine we'll see a lot of lawsuits. Healthcare, probably pretty straightforward. It's probably going to be a requirement, but if you're in any other business, it'll be kind of interesting to see how that plays out. Angela Johnson, thank you so much. I always talk about FFCRA, and I don't point out that it's for employers that are under 500 employees. So yes, if you're over 500 employees, different for paying for quarantine. You can use PTO. There may be an unemployment comp option. All right, just looking to see. Do you have any other questions? What are you seeing, Kevin?
Amy, do you have any thoughts on whether at this point FFCRA is going to be extended past the end of the year?
Yeah, so as of right now, FFCRA is set to expire December 31st. It's not looking real hopeful that Congress is going to get their act together before the end of this year to extend it. They don't seem to be able to get their act together about anything. But I would be surprised if we don't see something early next year. But I have no inside track on that, but I would be surprised if we don't see something. So stay tuned.
Yeah. The couple questions about temperature screening. It's not mandatory that you temperature screen.
It now is, yeah. It now is.
Oh, it now
if
is.
You're in person. It now is.
And
I can speak to digital thermometers. I see somebody has a question about that. So I have to temp screen my son every day for school. I think that thing is wildly inaccurate. It comes up very different every day. It always comes up low. So I don't have a great recommendation, but if anybody does, if you have a digital thermometer that you love, feel free to chat that in or put it in the Q&A, and we'll be happy to share that with anybody in our email that goes out after this. I have not heard of one, and I have not found one that is particularly great.
And somebody asked a question whether an employee can take unused vacation before FFCRA, or is that first?
FFCRA is intended to be in addition to anything that you as the employer, in addition to and above and beyond, it's supposed to come first. It's supposed to be the priority. So even if you offer PTO, you got to do FFCRA first.
Okay. Someone asked, PA requirement last week expanded to say that if you are out of state less than 24 hours, you don't need a negative COVID test or quarantine. I didn't recall that.
I haven't seen that in particular. I know if you're commuting for work or you're commuting for medical care, you don't have to quarantine or get the test. But I'll be happy to look at that as well, and we can update next week if there are any changes. And believe me, this is all changing. And what generally happens, we saw this in the spring, right? The government will put out their list of requirements. There'll be concern from the business community, and the government will go ahead and clarify things, usually through FAQs. So I will keep up to date on those, and next Tuesday, if there are any updates, I'll certainly let you guys know.
And someone said about the working from home requirement recommendation. Again, what you said is it's no longer about essential businesses. It's more of, is your job impossible to do? Could right. be you only need to come in occasionally, to do something that's impossible, right. But it's not tied to essential business.
Yeah, and some of this can be technology related. I mean, I think most folks have upgraded their technology over the last 6 to 9 months, but I was getting calls last spring from companies that had very archaic technology, and they said, we literally can't do a lot of stuff from home because we can't access our systems. So again, it's not about essential versus non-essential business. It's about, can you actually do your job from home? And I think a lot of us who are white collar workers, yeah, we can. If you're doing manufacturing, if you're doing retail, if you're running food service, obviously you can't do that stuff from home.
And John, thank you. John did send us a link to the PA site that does say if you're less than 24 hours outside the state. Oh. So thank you, John.
Awesome. Thank you, John.
Well, Amy, thank you again. We will continue these legal updates for the next 2 weeks. And then once we're back after January, we'll probably devote a whole session to kind of an update on all the legal, since so much is happening, and that'll be kind of the new year. But again, we'll have 2 more weeks to this, and hope you can join us. So thank you again. I know we went a little over today, but a lot of great comments, and hopefully you got something of value out of both sessions. Have a great week.
All right. Take care, everybody.